Okay, this is a video on the LA, on the violence that are happening in the riots, sorry, that are happening in LA. Okay, I'll try my best to shut up, but I doubt that that'll happen. So I mean, we'll see what's going on. These are the riots in LA, stemming from all of the bullcrap that I have covered thus far.
These ICE protests over in Los Angeles and what the Trump administration is now doing.
And remember, like we saw earlier. Well, hey, you know what? I'll just go back. What is it? Okay, in Los Angeles, Hamas, Algerian armed Islamic group, and this one that I'm not even going to try, okay? In LA, this is what we're looking at.
To try to tackle that entire situation. I want to take a look at some of this footage over in that area, some aerial footage courtesy of our partners there at Fox 11 in Los Angeles. Take a look at this. President Trump deploying 2,000 California National Guard troops to LA over the objections of Governor Gavin Newsom after a second day of clashes between hundreds of protesters and federal immigration authorities in riot gear. Confrontations broke out on Saturday near Home Depot in the heavily Latino city of Paramount, which is just south of Los Angeles. That's where federal agents were staging at a Department of Homeland Security office nearby. Now, agents unleashed tear gas, flashbang explosives, and
I mean, they got to do something for crowd control that isn't lethal, because the moment they go lethal, first of all, it's just going to get a lot worse, and I don't think they really should do that unless they have to. But the moment they get lethal, they will get absolutely cooked in the media. So they're doing whatever they can to disperse the crowd in a non-lethal manner, and they should be applauded for it, but they're not.
Pepper balls, and protesters in turn hurled rocks and cement at Border Patrol vehicles. We want to continue this discussion even further by bringing on the program now national security analyst, retired Marines intelligence officer Hal Kemper. Hal, good to see you.
Good to see you, Kirill.
You can choose to raid the caravan, or you can choose to.
Yeah, well, I mean, the terrorists are definitely choosing to raid the caravan. That's all I'm saying.
All right, let's start with the basics, Hal. What can the National Guard do here in this situation? What was the thought process behind sending those troops?
Well, Kirill, it's rather interesting. The National Guard has two statuses. They are a military force. Their armies say, I mean, their uniforms say U.S. Army or U.S. Air Force, depending on which component they're in.
Yeah.
But
they are a state and federal force, yeah.
Day-to-day, they kind of work under the governor, more or less. The governor can call them up. He can use them for things like quelling civil unrest. He can actually even use them for law enforcement, although most states, they don't do that.
Think of it like day labor, right? Where you go to through a specific company and you go and do just like labor at specific construction sites, but you only do it for the day because you're kind of on loan to them. They're paying you and you're working for them, but your employer is not them necessarily. It's the day labor thing, right? So in this instance, the federal guard, the National Guard is a federal fighting force, but they are on loan to all of the 50 states, and they, on a day-to-day basis, they're managed by the state, but they can be federalized at any time.
But they could do that.
They are still the federal army
under state law if they're in state status, and it's what's called state active duty.
Yeah.
What President Trump has done is he's called these National Guard troops up in federal status in what's called Title 10. That's a federal status like any other federal military member anywhere in the world. And he's using them, and that's where it's not quite clear, but he's bringing them up. He's going to not bring them up, they're actually in law. I think for the most part, they're actually activating National Guard troops in the Los Angeles area. But they will disperse to various locations to provide some sort of federal military support. And that,
when you got to think, in a lot of these areas, the local police force is being forced to stand down too. Like the mayors and the police chiefs and things like we covered in Dearborn, they don't want to stop these riots. They don't care enough to actually shut down the violence and the destruction. So there's really no other option than to send in the National Guard, because nobody else is going to fucking stop it.
That's what's not clear. There was some language that was put out about quelling the riots or quelling the protests or doing something like that. That would be the president invoking the Insurrection Act. That is basically saying that state and local authorities have lost control of the situation, and the only way they can...
And again, I don't really classify it as losing control so much as refusing to control it.
Gain control.
Like I covered how California sucks. They can clean it up. They choose not to.
Protect the public is to declare the Insurrection Act, and he could do that. He has not done that. But what could they do short of that? Well, they historically speaking, they can do a lot. They were used in the '92 riots in Los Angeles. Federalized National Guard and the Marines. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, has talked about possibly bringing up the Marines from Camp Pendleton, just south of Los Angeles. And they were used essentially to support and protect law enforcement in what...
I'm fairly certain both Marine basic training bases are in California. I could be wrong about that, but I know that there's was it Paradise Island? I think is right off, either right outside of San Antonio, or San Diego. But I'm pretty sure both of them are in California. Like there's Marines there for sure that they could send in.
What they were doing, their mission, they weren't out there conducting law enforcement.
And I've heard somebody in the Democratic Party say that these are federal war fighters. Okay, they are not trained to go into domestic areas, and they're not trained to deal with generalized public, and blah, blah, blah. That's a load of horse shit. Okay, if you know anything about the actual guerrilla tactics that are used in wars right now, they operate in suburban areas, in crowded areas. As a matter of fact, that happens to be their specialty. I don't know what the hell these people are talking about. They're just making shit up, man.
That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. But they were providing support and they were protecting law enforcement in enforcing the law. That's 1870. They also could do other...
Pretty sure the Posse Comitatus Act is just something that doesn't allow the federal army to operate domestically. That's why we have the National Guard. That's why we have local police forces and the FBI and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, the FBI directly is because of that, right? Because we needed a way to enforce laws across state lines, and so that's what the FBI was created for. Now, obviously, it's been corrupted since then, but that's what it was for, because the federal military isn't allowed to operate on domestic soil for obvious reasons.
Federal to federal support, in that they could protect all federal property, even things like recruiting offices in strip malls or a post office, whatever. If it's federal property, you could conceivably bring in federal troops to act as security at that federal property. It's not very cost effective, but it can be done. So there are a lot of things they can do without invoking the Insurrection Act, but frankly, they're under federal status, and those troops are just the same as any other U.S. Army troop.
Yep.
They're under federal status, and they're going to basically go out there and do whatever a federal troop can or cannot do.
This is what they have to do, because there's a fucking car burning down in the middle of this intersection.
Because I just said that the president did deploy this, but Governor Gavin Newsom doesn't necessarily agree with this entire tactic. So how does this go between...
Governor Gavin Newsom isn't necessarily fighting for what's best for his state or constituents. Just saying.
Federal and state level when it comes to what these troops are going to be able to accomplish.
Well, if they're under state status, if they're on state active duty under the governor, they could actually go out there theoretically and enforce laws. They could use them like law enforcement. They could actually go out there and arrest people. They could detain them. They could put them in prison. They could do a lot of things. Under federal status, they cannot. Posse Comitatus Act says that federal troops cannot be used in a law enforcement role, and that's
that's what I said.
It's been used for a very long time.
See, I know things. Definitely subscribe. I'm right all the time.
However, there are a number of things they can do. For example, the U.S. Navy routinely patrols areas trying to interdict illegal shipments of drugs into the U.S. at sea. Now, the U.S. Navy, like the U.S. Army, has no law enforcement authority because of the Posse Comitatus Act. However, they'll throw a few Coast Guardsmen on board who do have federal law enforcement authority.
Yep. Coast Guard is like the National Guard, but for the Navy. And they get a lot of shit, but they are armed to the teeth.
And the ship effectively becomes a Coast Guard vessel, albeit controlled by the Navy. It's a naval vessel. It's not like they changed out the crew, but they have these Coast Guard members on board, and the Coast Guard members can actually, stop ships at sea. They could search the ships looking for drugs. They could arrest people. They could seize the illegal cargo, if you will. They can do a lot of things like that. And the Navy personnel on board can actually act as a security force, if you will, for the Coast Guardsmen. So you have a couple of Coast Guardsmen on board a ship and a dozen heavily armed.
Throw them in the brig, which is, funnily enough, is actually a thing.
Sailors behind them, and they do an enforcement mission. Now, take that example and translate it to the ground. That's kind of what you saw federal troops doing in Los Angeles in '92, where they were essentially backing up law enforcement, protecting law enforcement, providing security support for law enforcement, but law enforcement was actually...
I am a big advocate, though, for the punishment fitting the crime. So, if we find a Houthi terrorist, we need to make him walk the plank. Yeah.
Doing that law enforcement job. The challenge here is the governor has not requested any assistance. In '92, the governor actually asked President Bush to federalize those troops and to bring the troops in. In this case, Gavin Newsom is saying, this is grandstanding. I don't want federal troops in Los Angeles.
Clearly, you need them. Whether you want them or not is not an issue.
And it looks like the federal troops will be brought in strictly to support federal personnel, federal law enforcement personnel.
Well, yeah, because you directed your local law enforcement to not comply or otherwise cooperate with ICE in any way. Like, you passed a fucking bill that would that makes it illegal for federal law enforcement officers to wear masks in your state. Now, obviously, the Department of Homeland Security, who does not at all have to listen to you, obviously they are not going to, because it would be retarded to listen to you. You want violence to come to these ICE officers. You are doing what you can to incentivize them to not do their job, okay? We don't give a fuck what you have to say, Gavin Newsom, all right? You are not fighting for what is best for your state or your citizens. Flat out.
And federal facilities.
And President Trump should absolutely send people in to deal with the problem that you fucking created, because it is ultimately his responsibility to do so.
Indubitably. That hasn't been said yet, but it's pretty much implied in doing that federal law enforcement mission. And the interesting part of this is that for most of the state and local law enforcement have said emphatically, I read the chief of Los Angeles PD and the sheriff of Los Angeles County has made it very clear in press releases they put out today that their law enforcement personnel will not engage or support the civil warrants, enforcement of civil warrants involving immigration. That they will not go into these situations trying to find someone's immigration status. And so in that case, they basically said they won't support or enforce federal immigration law. So the federal immigration law enforcement authorities, ICE, are out there doing that. And the ICE folks were basically attacked, if you will, by the protesters, throwing things at them, a variety of other things. And so President Trump is bringing in these federal troops to protect those federal law enforcement personnel, to enforce federal law in a city and county and a state that will not enforce those federal laws. There are some slight parallels, if you will, to what we saw in the early 60s with Governor George Wallace in Alabama, where basically the courts had said, hey, look, the University of Alabama has to be integrated, and U.S. Marshals had to escort the
That's not at all the same thing, okay? That was a different... Okay, so how do I put this? That was the forced integration based on retarded racist laws. So we're getting rid of that and forcing people to see black people as though they are actual people, because they are. This is talking about getting rid of people that aren't supposed to be here. Okay, it's not getting rid of black people. It's getting rid of people that aren't supposed to be here. Okay, if you leave this country and you get in line, we will let you immigrate. But if you choose to skip the line and enter illegally, then you have broken a law and you will be deported. That is the message that the Trump administration is sending, and I don't know why it's so goddamn divisive. Well, I know exactly why it's so fucking divisive, but it's very clear that they are just grandstanding on the fact that Trump is trying to get rid of things, and they can make it look bad because they know that their constituents are not going to read past the headlines.
African-American students onto the University of Alabama campus. And
never mind the fact that that the general consensus in America is that, fuck yeah, this is absolutely based. Like,
more
it's crazy to think that the American population in general actually likes emergency responders.
for them to go to class. Governor Wallace, a strict segregationist, called out the National Guard of Alabama and put them on the steps to block the students and the U.S. Marshals. And then President Kennedy turned around and federalized all those National Guard troops. And literally, the general in charge turned around to the governor and basically said, "Sir, I work for the president now. I no longer work for you." And all those National Guard troops were stood down, dispersed, and the students came onto campus. So there's a lot of different ways legally this can be done.
Staying on some of the topics that you just mentioned, I do want to put up a post from...
By the way, just so everybody knows, if you are an actual member of the armed services in any capacity, be it National Guard or active duty or otherwise, in any branch, you do have to comply with orders as long as they are lawful. If they are unlawful orders, you do not have to obey them. Like, flat out. If it doesn't matter if a 4-star general walks in and tells an E1 to do something that is against the law, the E1 can tell him no. Just saying.
California Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm going to take it here. So he posted this on X. I'm going to read it in full. He says the federal government is moving to take over the California National Guard and deploy 2,000.
Definitely follow me on X at real_Sestel. I roast Gavin Newsom all the time. All the time. I attack this man.
Soldiers.
With my words.
That move is purposefully inflammatory and will only escalate tensions. LA authorities are able to access law enforcement assistance at a moment's notice. We are in close coordination with the city and county, and there is currently no unmet need. The Guard has been admirably serving LA throughout recovery. This is the wrong mission and will erode public trust. Now, Hal, you did mention that some of these state and local law enforcement agencies are not going to be helping ICE with their operations. So where does the California Highway Patrol, the LAPD, the FBI, where do they come into play?
You're a super trustworthy guy.
The California Highway Patrol is really the only law enforcement body that the state has. They used to have more, but that's pretty much what they got. So when he says he's bringing out the California Highway Patrol, in these situations, we've seen it with riots, we've seen it with other things, that is the law enforcement element of the state that they can pull out, and they have, full law enforcement authority as sworn officers, sworn peace officers of the state of California. So that's what he's doing. He's also, if you listen to the language, he's laying what I'm sure will end up in court someday, as probably very soon in arguments, as to if the president tries to invoke the Insurrection Act. You listen to the language. He says, look, we have not lost control. We have, in so many words, he says we have control. We are responding to whatever needs to be done out there. So basically, he's setting the legal predicate to say there was not an insurrection situation. There was not a situation in general where there was a need to bring in federal troops to help with law enforcement. If the president says it's an insurrection or he invokes the Insurrection Act, then those federal troops could be used in a law enforcement role. However, in the past, presidents have been very reticent to do that, especially if you're a Republican president with...
Trump absolutely needs to. This is 1,000% a Democratic terrorist insurrection problem in this fucking country, and he needs to deal with it now. Right fucking now.
Democrat.
I can see why he wouldn't, because it will make his party look bad, probably coming up on the 2026 midterms. So maybe right after that, handle it, and then worry about JD becoming the 48th president right after that.
Politically controlled state. That's what happened with President Bush and Katrina. He brought in the federal troops. He probably, if you look at what was happening in New Orleans, he probably had a lot of reason to say that the local law enforcement lost control. He could have imposed the Insurrection Act, but he chose not to, just because of the optics. A Republican president imposing that act in a state controlled by Democrats, in a city controlled by Democrats. So he decided not to do that. That was his rationale at the time. Although federal troops did deploy in the streets. They had quite a show of presence, but if you actually got into the rules of engagement, or the rules of force, rules of engagement is what they call it in the military, in terms of what they're doing, they did not have a federal law enforcement role, although if you see heavily armed federal troops patrolling your street where you live, that tends to dampen down.
Rules of engagement, basically, if you're in the military, at least, I'm not really sure what it's like to be a cop, but if you're in the military, at least, then right before you go into any kind of like dangerous scenario, they tell you what you are and are not allowed to get away with doing.
Any enthusiasm for doing rioting or looting or anything else. So it worked. It worked very well in that situation when they finally got the troops in there, I should say. But it's not clear what President Trump is going to do with these troops. But I think I sent you over earlier. You know, you can go back historically. The Marines actually were used in the 1920s, U.S. Marines, federal, to
I mean, you want to clear out a
U.S.
suburban
Postal
area,
Service,
you can use the Marines,
because the basically postal parcels are being robbed all the time.
Yeah.
So they put Marines on board the trains. I think they put Marines. I think the Marines were actually flying postal bags as well, and the rationale behind that was that they need to protect this federal entity, the U.S. Postal Service, in doing its federally assigned mission. So they did that, and they did it for a while. And in that very limited role, they were allowed to do it. But that doesn't mean they were out there kicking in doors and, you know, arresting people, stuff like that.
They should have been.
That's a different thing. And
they should have
what
been.
Posse Comitatus prevents the U.S. military from doing unless the president invokes the Insurrection Act. And hence you go back to what Gavin Newsom just put in that news release.
Yeah.
Did you know that you can have permanent teeth in just 24 hours?
We need to have the balls to
That's
use
right.
the
Only
laws
24
that
hours
we
and your new
already
smile
have
is
on the
ready.
books. It's
I
gonna
want to show another
look. It doesn't matter. It's gonna make you look bad. It's fucking worth it.
post here, this time from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. I want to talk about this a little bit. He said this: the violent mob assaults on ICE and federal law enforcement are designed to prevent the removal of illegal aliens from our soil, a dangerous invasion facilitated by criminal cartels.
I have been pleasantly surprised by Pete Hegseth. I mean, he was, at least for me anyway, he was a relative nobody when he was put in charge of the now Department of War, which is total badass name, by the way. Yeah, he was a relative nobody, and you know what? He's doing a great job. I so far he has not done a single thing that I disagree with. So until he does, he's got my he's got my support.
AKA foreign terrorist organizations, and a huge national security risk. So how you touched on it a little bit there.
Also, every member of the armed services takes an oath to the Constitution of the United States to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Most people don't realize that there can be domestic enemies. And we're seeing them right now. They're burning down our cities, and we need to get rid of them.
But Secretary of Defense Hegseth saying that he is even going to be sending some of...
and I've already showed you, there are plenty of foreign terrorist organizations in these large cities. LA in particular has Hamas.
His own forces there to help quell this situation. So how and when would we see that actually come to fruition, let's say if it does?
Well, technically speaking, the National Guard, all National Guard units are, quote, his forces, if you will. Once they're federalized, once they're put under federal status, Title 10, they're federal troops. They do not work for the governor. Day by day, they normally, the chain of command with the National Guard in a state will run up through what's called the adjutant general, who's this two-star general for the state, and he manages the force, if you will. He's not an operational commander, but
he's a regional manager, if you will, a local store manager, I guess.
Manages a force.
No, he's a little bit bigger than a store manager. Yeah, I'd go with regional, probably. Yeah.
In terms of what the National Guard is, but the National Guard is a reserve element of the U.S. Department of Defense, of the Army or the Navy.
They can probably call up the reservists too and fucking activate them as well. I'm just saying.
Or I should say of the Army or the Air Force.
Or in this situation anyway, if they do become federalized, if President Trump does actually invoke the Insurrection Act, yeah, I'm fairly certain not only could he federalize the National Guard, but he could activate the reservists and send them into these cities as well.
In a couple states, they have a small naval militia, but it's not much. But they are an element of the Army, if you will, and they get federal funding to do training to meet those federal military.
Honestly, between the FBI and ICE agents, they've probably got it all pretty handled. As long as the local law enforcement will actually work with them, they should be able to get everything done. There shouldn't be a reason to enact any of these things. But like I said, people like fucking Gavin Newsom are making it as hard as they possibly can for federal law enforcement to operate within the city. So until everybody gets on board with this, it's just going to be difficult, and they might have to do this. It's going to have to be done. It's up to them how they want it done. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The choice is yours.
Military standards. It's called Title 32, and that's a separate issue. But that's something they do for training. So when he activates them, he could. However, to your point, the forces he was referring to that are always owned by him are the Marines down in Camp Pendleton. And Camp Pendleton is just about an hour and a half south of Los Angeles, depending on traffic. Albeit, I live in Los Angeles, so I can tell you the traffic could vary greatly depending on the time of day. But they're from Camp Pendleton, and they have rolled north, if you will, into L.A. to deal with civil unrest. It's not a mission they don't know. And I over the years back, I worked very closely
almost looks like
with
there's
Camp
something
Pendleton
on fire over there.
On this issue with the Marines at Camp Pendleton. Okay. That was my, I don't know if it was my primary duty, but it was probably the biggest.
Woo! Damn! Okay. Maybe don't deport all of them,
Thing that I worked on.
Maybe not all of them. Maybe some can stay for, a little while at least. Solid 20 minutes or so. That's all I need.
Working with the respective commands down there for various situations, whether it's wildfires, preparing for civil unrest situations like we saw in 92 or whatever. So
I don't know if it's coincidence that there's 66.6 thousand people watching right now. No, I mean, obviously this isn't live, but like live, this is what they had.
They know what they can do. They know what they can't do legally under the law. It really depends on whatever the president does at this point. However, you do have, and this is where I'm kind of watching closely. It is going to be, I'm not a lawyer, but it's an interesting legal argument, is that the state and the local law enforcement authorities have refused to enforce federal law. And again, that takes me back to what happened in the 60s, early 60s, with Governor George Wallace in Alabama with integrating the University of Alabama. In that situation, he would not either enforce or obey what the federal courts had told him to do. And so there is a bit of a parallel there.
You know what? I'm glad let me see it again.
If they do invoke the Insurrection Act, that they will probably cite this refusal by the state and the local, by the county and the city, or cities, I should say, in Southern California.
This is what I'm talking about. They refusing to comply or collaborate in any way with federal law enforcement.
Or sanctuary cities, I should say, that to enforce federal law or to help federal law enforcement in this regard. So it will be an interesting discussion, and I'm pretty sure that whatever comes out of this may end up going to the Supreme Court. In fact, I would be shocked if the Supreme Court didn't have to rule on this.
You know how Los Angeles isn't the only place that we've been seeing these anti-ICE protests. I mean, they're happening all over the country. So given what's going on.
By the way, since this came out, they did actually rule on it. They said that the National Guard can remain under federal control because Trump has absolutely every right to do that.
This weekend, specifically in LA, could we be seeing a similar situation within the coming days, perhaps? And can you share maybe the strategy behind perhaps placing troops in certain areas?
Well, the troops themselves, obviously very capable units. One of the reasons they always like to bring in the military is because they're self-sufficient. They have their own built-in security, if you will. Obviously they're heavily armed. So if you need something involving arms, well, the military is the biggest member of the gun club, so to speak, and so they have everything they need to do that. What they're looking at is they can deploy tactically. And they're very well trained to deploy tactically.
They are,
to provide security in certain situations. That's just what they do. And keep in mind, this is Los Angeles, but the military, U.S. military, when it's overseas, they've been doing this for many years. I mean, the entire war on terror, they were deploying into various urban areas. And
that's what I'm fucking fucking say, oh my god, dude, I'm telling you, I know things, okay? I'm not just talking out of my ass here. I know things. Definitely subscribe to me because I have the correct opinions about shit, all right? My takes are the correct ones. Definitely follow me, okay? Follow me everywhere. I am everywhere.
And dealing with riots and protests and improvised explosive devices and firefights and everything else. So it's not something that's particularly alien to what the military can do.
They're all waving foreign
It's just we have a law that says they can't do federal law
enforcement.
Now, if I could just go back a little bit, because I think I forgot to answer this. This is the issue here is that local law enforcement won't work with federal law enforcement.
That was weird.
ICE, the FBI, any other federal law enforcement, they have law enforcement power anywhere in the United States. They have law enforcement power. So they're out there conducting lawful law enforcement operations, and they came under attack, so to speak, and that's why the
not so to speak. Don't parse your words, buddy. All right, fucking hold strong to those words, okay? They're not being attacked, so to speak. They are just being attacked. Okay, say it. You don't have to apologize for being right.
White House is looking at putting those troops down there. Is, I think, based on what they mean. You heard some language in some of
have some courage in your convictions, my guy. Come on.
These announcements. So when you talk about quelling protests, that would imply an active mission, which could be some sort of law enforcement authority. However, they could deploy, as they did in 92, and simply support federal law enforcement. And actually, that's a very easy one. That's what we call federal to federal. In other words, federal troops supporting a federal agency or federal agencies.
Fuck yeah. If the local law enforcement agency doesn't want to step up, get the hell out of the way. We will do your job for you.
In doing their mission. That does not involve the governor, which is probably why one of the reasons the governor is upset about that, because for a federal agency to ask for federal military support in their mission, that goes strictly through federal channels. And I say that because some people out there talking on the air.
Mayor Karen Bass, the lady that oversaw the L.A. wildfires getting as bad as they were because her and Gavin Newsom didn't have water in the fire hydrants,
have been talking about how somehow this upsets the National Guard chain of command.
But diversity is what our strength is, right? Right?
Man, it doesn't. If they're in federal status, they come under U.S. Northern Command, which is a combatant commander for North America that is responsible for any federal military being used in North America. And the commander of U.S. Northern Command reports to the President of the United States. So that's kind of how that works. So there's nothing illegal there. What I think
no
they're
illegal
going to do
activity
is they're going to say, look, he didn't have enough reason to do it. It'll be an interesting discussion, but legally speaking,
they call us racist and fascist because they can't call us wrong.
Unless you see federal troops kicking in doors and arresting people, there's a lot of things the troops can do which do not, as far as I can tell, violate federal law.
Just wanted to put this post here from LA Mayor Karen Bass, where she ends it saying, just to be clear, the National Guard has not been deployed in the city of Los Angeles. How there is so much really to get to with this topic, but a lot that we're going to be watching for in the coming days. Anything you would like to add before I let you go? What do you have your eye on?
Well, Mayor Bass is saying the National Guard has not been deployed. And I think that may be because the president actually sent out a thing on Truth Social thanking the National Guard for what they did in Los Angeles. Right now, what they're doing is they're just mobilizing and activating. I don't think they've got any actual troops on the street, so to speak, troops deployed around Los Angeles.
To be fair, they are both grandstanding. Trump and Mayor Karen Bass both, or at least they are on social media. Trump's doing based-ass fucking awesome things in real life, but they're both just grandstanding and trolling on social media.
And that may be what Karen Bass is kind of offhand.
The internet is not real life, guys.
Handily referring to is the fact that the National Guard troops, as far as I know, are not deployed. Now, not that I've done this a few times, but if I had, I would probably deploy those forces at night under cover of darkness when there's less people on the streets and they can't be observed. So what is happening now may change dramatically over the day and certainly into the night.
They do. No, they do it at nighttime. Yeah, you're right. You fucking foreshadowed that awesome, beautifully. They do it at night. But the politicians take the photos of the peaceful things during the day when all the fires aren't there.
And it takes a while to get
And they think we're stupid too, because they'll go and they'll cover up the clear graffiti with something just to make it look good, and then they'll take the photo. I'm just throwing that out there. Like these people aren't real.
All the troops in, you got to bring them in, you got to activate them. By the way, I should mention to you one thing that's kind of interesting. A number of the National Guard troops are probably law enforcement in their civilian lives. Law enforcement in their civilian lives that are probably prohibited from helping ICE serve these civil warrants, civil law warrants.
Yeah, National Guard troops have real jobs. They could be law enforcement. They could be a factory worker. He could be a roofer. He could be some office job. Like he could be your therapist. The National Guard troops have real life jobs because they're only National Guard during peace times when they're not doing anything, like once a month. They have to go for their training like once a month. They'll spend a weekend out at some base somewhere. They'll run drills. They'll like get up fucking dark 30 in the morning to reveille, but they do it once a month, and the rest of the time they're just regular people doing regular people things.
And it's very interesting as they're literally going to change uniforms, show up there, and in their federal
God help you if they don't shave before putting that uniform on.
Army status, they will actually be doing something that they can't do as law enforcement in their civilian status. It's just the way it kind of works. It's not the first time that's happened, but it is kind of an interesting, quirky situation with you.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. LA's wild. The local law enforcement is not being allowed to help. And there are actual terrorist organizations there that are likely in integrating themselves into these protests. But even if they aren't, there are newly designated domestic terrorist organizations that are absolutely there doing this. The whole anti-fascist organization is part of the reason why there are so many actual fires. It's part of the reason why there's so many bricks being thrown at police officers' heads. Absolutely. Follow me on X at real_Sestel. Subscribe to me on YouTube. Follow me on Rumble if you don't like YouTube. Yeah, absolutely follow me here on Kick too, and join the community. Okay, I'm right about everything. Just trust me. Okay, trust me. In the very same way that you don't trust the government, trust me. Okay, put all of that trust you're not giving the government, give that to me. I will take it. Okay, thanks guys. Bye.